This is great. We have a full house tonight. Good evening. I'm Jean McCormick, and I have the great honor of being the president of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight, along with our special guests for this evening's program, Katy Tur and Robin Young, who will be coming through this door in a minute. We're doing something a little different tonight. We're really thrilled to be joined by so many community leaders, and we are especially excited to welcome our new members of the Institute. Membership is one of the ways that we make it possible to have programs like this evening's. For those of you who might be visiting the Institute for the first time, welcome to our replica Senate chamber. It is truly spectacular in the way that Senator Kennedy envisioned it might remind people about the important role of the Senate in the life of our government. And every day, students and adults like you and I come in and sit in those seats, and they become senators for a day and actually try to grapple with the very same issues that the Congress is dealing with today, and be reminded of the important role of participation in a democracy. We all have to be involved. Through our interactive exhibits and our educational programs and these public programs like tonight, our goal is to inspire a new generation, and I keep thinking to myself, re-inspire us of the older generation, to see ourselves as shapers of our community and to take an active role in civic life. That's what Senator Kennedy hoped for. This evening's program is part of our Getting to the Point series. As you can see, it's not always easy to get to the point through our winding construction. And sometimes it's not always easy to get to the point in our conversations. But we invite people from all walks of life to talk about important issues in our government and our country. And this year, as many of us continue to reflect on the impact of last year's presidential election, we also consider the role of the press in our political system. And perhaps no one can speak better to this than our special guest for this evening, Katy Tur. In a historic 2016 campaign, Katy was there from the beginning. She spent over 500 days on the campaign trail covering the Trump campaign. She fact-checked the campaign's falsities. Now that's an interesting word. I read it 3 or 4 times. Not one we've been using much before now. And as a result, she did find herself singled out by then candidate Trump himself. She became one of the most visible journalists during the 2016 election cycle, and she was part of the first women-led politics team in the history of network news. She has documented her experience in her exceptional new book, Unbelievable: My Front Row Seat to the Craziest Campaign in American History. Today, she is a correspondent for NBC News and an anchor for MSNBC. She's also the recipient of the 2017 Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism. We are so pleased tonight to be able to hear more about her experience. After tonight's discussion, you'll have an opportunity to purchase Katy's book in our gift store in the lobby, and she will be participating in a book signing. We are also thrilled to welcome Robin Young to help lead this conversation. Robin, as you know, is the host of Here and Now on NPR and WBUR. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Katy and Robin into the chamber and ask for you to join me in giving them a warm welcome.
This is so cool. Can I get you all to smile for a selfie?
I'm going to get one too.
I want to take a panorama. I think this is the only circumstance where I'll ever be sitting in this position in a room like this.
Actually, when she does that, everybody, when you're ready, everybody wave.
Hold on.
And you're on C-SPAN too. Wave.
This is an appropriate use of time.
Katy Tur.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. By the way, how many of you use the hashtag I'm with Tur? Check it out. How did that feel?
That hashtag?
No, that reception just now.
Really amazing. Overwhelming, undeserved, surreal, exciting.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the undeserved part. Let's review. You were a foreign correspondent when NBC assigned you to be the first and, for a long time, only correspondent assigned to follow the Trump campaign, both neophytes, as you told me. There'd be those infamous now moments long before President Trump referred to Senator Bob Corker as little Bob Corker. You were little Katy.
He got 2 Ds, though, so
Yeah,
it's slightly different.
2 Ts. Huge rally back in that fenced-in area where the Trump campaign kept reporters, so it was sort of like indicating to the rabid dogs where the meat was. There you were in the cage. You know, little Katy, she's back there. She's such a liar. What a liar she is. Unheard of in the history of American politics.
It's no secret that politicians don't like reporters, generally. Nixon had a fraught relationship with his press corps. There are legendary stories about Ron Ziegler, his press person, getting into it with reporters. What was unusual about this was the very public nature of it, the way that he would go after reporters, myself included, from the stage of rallies, and have the crowd, encourage the crowd to essentially turn on us and boo us. There were moments where I spoke to somebody on the campaign, late in the campaign, after we had armed security, after I'd gotten death threats, after not only NBC provided armed security, but so did ABC and so did CNN, and during the height of the CNN suck stuff as well. I said, does he know that he's potentially putting us in real harm's way, in danger, that something really bad could happen? And the person said, yes, he knows. And I said, does he care? And he said, I don't think he cares.
Why do you think it was, that you in particular were so singled out? I mean, from the very first interview, 2015, New Hampshire, not interview, but very first rally in 2015, he said something about, and the television reporters are here, and there's Katy Tur, and she's not even looking at me.
Yeah, so that was the first time we'd ever shared the same era. I didn't know Donald Trump. I knew him from television. I knew him from The Apprentice. I knew him from the New York tabloids, from the birtherism crusade, not as a serious political candidate. And I had no reason to believe that he knew who I was. So I'm standing in the back of this rally, which was just a couple hundred people around a backyard pool, thinking, what the heck am I doing here? And what the heck is this guy talking about? Because he was, talking about the wall that he was going to build and defending his comments about Mexico sending rapists. He was then alternating between that and how he gets more standing ovations than anybody. And then how the press is terrible, and, oh, Katy, you haven't even looked up at me once. And I'm like,
who,
is he
me?
talking
What?
about me? And he was, and I remember just screaming right back at him, I'm tweeting what you're saying. And he liked that, said I did a good job, and then he continued on.
That's important. He said, well, I hope so. And by the way, you do a good job.
Yeah.
When I read over these again in the book, which is terrific, and you all have to get it and get it signed afterwards. But when I was reading back over it, in the current climate of Harvey Weinstein, and also since these comments yelled at you, we've had the tape of the Donald Trump, Billy Bush tape, talking about grabbing women's lady parts. Reading over these comments now, in this climate, this feels like sexual harassment from the stage.
Well, he went after all reporters. It wasn't just female reporters.
I know, but
We called Tom Yamas a sleaze.
Yeah, and he talked about Charles Krauthammer not being able to get a pair of
Put on a
pants.
pair of
This
pants.
was in an
Yeah.
interview with you, and of course he's in a wheelchair. So there's that. But no, with you, there seems to be something. Have you thought about it? There's some sort of power play going on.
I think there's a power play going on. I was doing my job, and he alternated between trying to charm me and trying to bully me. If I wasn't reporting what he liked, he would go on the attack and the offensive from the stage. If I reported something he did like, he would tell everyone how great I was, try to introduce me to an entire crowd at a rally once as something like the great Katy Tur. He kissed me on the cheek one morning when he liked my reporting at a Morning Joe town hall, and then went on to brag about it on television, which is unusual. But at the same time, that's what he does to this day when he's sitting with his counterparts in the Republican Party. I mean, he will have Dean Heller sitting next to him at a cabinet meeting, a Senate meeting, and, you know, joke around with him, not so jokingly, to say that, you know, if you don't do what I say, I'm gonna go after you when it comes to the healthcare vote. That's just the way he operates. To ascribe a certain other label to it, I'm just not prepared to do it.
Yeah. What about Trump supporters? Because we have questions, by the way, that were submitted by many of you, and I'm going to try to work in as many as I can without dropping all of these papers. And, you know, obviously people turned on you, you needed support, you were spit at. You would see families, what looked like lovely families, but wait, look closer, the dad's wearing a T-shirt that says, Hillary sucks more than Monica does.
But not like Monica.
But not like Monica. And you'd be taken aback by, wait a second, they've got small children with them.
That wasn't even the worst. I mean, there was that. Then there was the father with his 2 kids and his wife proudly wearing a shirt that called Hillary Clinton a CUNT. There was a man who wore a shirt that said, I wish Hillary married OJ. I don't care what your political beliefs are. I don't care if you think Democrats have all the wrong ideas for this country, or if you think Republicans have all the wrong ideas for this country. That was a shirt that said, I hoped, essentially, that Hillary Clinton was brutally stabbed to death in the 1990s. I mean, that is so far beyond what should be acceptable for common decency, for behavior, let alone politics.
But do you think, I mean, you got to know the Trump supporters, and people, and there might, you know, this is Boston, but I'm sure there are many in this room. And Faith wrote to ask, you spoke about running into a Trump supporter in the bathroom before a rally who helped you with your hair, an act of kindness.
You can't paint an entire group of supporters with a broad brush. I mean, I think it's a mistake to call, I thought it was a huge mistake to call Donald Trump supporters deplorables. I don't think you don't go after voters in this country, and I don't think it's a good idea to say that this swath of voters are all a bunch of racists, xenophobes, misogynists, you know, whatever name you want to ascribe to them. They are a varied group of people from a number of different socioeconomic backgrounds. They have, some of them voted for President Obama in the past. A lot of them were women. I mean, there are a variety of supporters. And at the same time, they were the kind of people who oftentimes would probably live their lives in a very polite and, you know, rule-abiding way, not a non-offensive way. But there was something about walking into a Trump rally that allowed people to shed all of those rules, to shed those burdens. I write in the book that Trump had a halo of crudeness. And in that halo of crudeness, he allowed everybody else to be crude around him. He said whatever he wanted. He never backed down, and a lot of people found that refreshing. People who maybe couldn't tell a joke any longer because it was a politically incorrect joke. People who were worried that they had to watch what they said and watch what they did. People who thought that their patriotism was being mistaken for racism. And they walked in there and they said, I can say and do whatever I'm thinking.
Yeah. We talked earlier about covering the primaries, and very early on, I was in Iowa, and you could see the lines at the Trump rally there, and was calling back to WBUR and saying, I'm meeting a lot of young people in particular, young men in particular, who are trying to decide between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump.
Yeah. There's a certain bro culture that would come out to the Trump rallies, men who would wear tank tops and, you know, big Make America Great Again hats, that college fraternity culture that would show up and really like the enthusiasm of the event. The same sort of people who would, you know, say, I want to vote for, and this is a kind of a broad brush, I have to apologize, but this is a demographic that I'm talking about, really liked either Bernie Sanders or like Donald Trump, and it was because they wanted an outsider. They wanted somebody different, somebody refreshing, somebody who wasn't part of the establishment, somebody whose name they hadn't been hearing their whole life, like Hillary Clinton, somebody who wasn't afraid to take on the system. Bernie Sanders had that quality, so did Donald Trump, and they both had jobs messages. I mean, these are young people who are either just in the search, or just in the middle of a search for a job, or soon to be graduating from college, and they wanted a better opportunity.
They wanted a disruptor, too.
Definitely wanted a disruptor.
Do you think, and I thought I observed this, that I constantly saw people who saw things that people on the left might see as appalling, like those T-shirts you mentioned, and they thought they were a perfectly acceptable parallel reality of what they might have seen. For instance, when George W. Bush, the invasion of Iraq, and there were so many people who were against that. And if you'd gone to the anti-war rally in Washington, you would have seen people wearing very disparaging T-shirts about George Bush.
Yeah, it's true.
And they really felt it was the same.
Yeah, and there's an argument to be made for that. I think that's just a sign of how corrosive our politics and our public discourse has become. The question is, where does it go from here? Do we correct it? Does it get better for 2020, for 2024? Or are we going to see even more crude language, crude behavior? Is there going to be a line that is too far, a bridge too far? Or where do we go?
Do you feel somewhat validated in your reporting that we now have a President Trump who hasn't really changed his style?
He's 71 years old. He's never going to change. This is who he is. The guy you saw on the campaign trail is the guy that you see in the Oval Office every day. He just yesterday he would make these broad statements on the campaign trail like, I saw thousands of Muslims cheering on the streets of New Jersey after the towers came down. Not true. Didn't happen. And then he forced his campaign staff to try and find evidence to bolster him. So they're running around and trying to find anything that might point to some shred of truth in that statement. Yesterday he did, you can't, because it's not true. Yesterday he did the same thing, which was saying that past presidents, including President Obama, didn't call the families of fallen soldiers. That is not true. But he said it. He's put it out there. People are going to want to believe it. They will believe it. And what does the White House do? They run in circles to try and find something that backs them up, that bolsters them. And what they found was Chief of Staff John Kelly, President Obama didn't call him. Well, he was at a number of events with Obama that were honoring fallen soldiers.
And Kelly's a Gold Star
Gold
father.
Star
His
family.
son was killed.
Exactly. But what they've done now, and this is what's sad about this, beyond politics, beyond Donald Trump, beyond whatever you may think about Republicans or Democrats, what's sad about this is we're now politicizing the death of John Kelly's son. That's awful. That shouldn't be happening right now.
We already politicized Gold Star families.
Exactly, and that happened during the campaign as well.
By the way, General Kelly, Brighton's own, I just want to say, he's from Brighton. So what should the press do? We have a question here about, let's see, I have these papers, about whether or not somebody suggests the press should boycott.
You can't boycott the President of the United States.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, you might not like him, but that's not what we do in this country.
Yeah.
He is the democratically elected President of the United States. And so we have a service to everybody in this room and to everybody in this land to cover the president. It affects you every single day. You have to cover it.
Lauren asked, should journalists boycott White House briefings as a sign of solidarity for his lack of respect for First Amendment rights and press accountability? That's the dropping to the knee.
Well, what you do if that happens, I mean, say you boycott the press briefings, you just validate Donald Trump's complaints that the press corps is out to get him, that they're not on his side. They're looking for any reason to not report on the things that he's doing. It's a double-edged sword in that way.
Well, and Barry also asks, from what you saw on the trail, do you think the president intentionally attacked the credibility of the press to rally his base? Is it just a technique, or is he really hurt? You know, some have suggested that when he lashes out like this, for instance, in the question yesterday, and what got completely obscured is that 4 soldiers were killed in Niger, and most Americans don't know why.
Yeah.
And we still aren't talking about that, because the question now becomes whether or not President Obama also or did not, you know, it's a lie.
Everything gets clouded.
Yeah.
He just makes things cloudier. He is very capable of distracting. Everything comes around. It's always about him. How does it make him look? How does it affect him? What does he need to do about something? It's not about the death of the soldiers. It's about what has he done, or what has he done in separation from his predecessors. Every policy, every subject, every interview, every topic, it all goes back to him. He uses I so much. The disaster response during the hurricanes, the governor called to say I was doing a good job. The FEMA director under Clinton called to say I did a good job. It's me, 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 me. What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
No, it was just all about, you know, is this...
Oh, does he lash out?
Is it to do that, to distract us, or do you feel there's something that he's genuinely hurt?
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think he likes to dominate the headlines. And on days, we would see this during the campaign, on days where he wasn't a main focus in the headline, they were few and far between. He would make sure that he took it over. I mean, the Muslim ban day is a perfect example of this. The day before, President Obama had given a speech on terrorism. So the day was being dominated by that speech by the president. And then Donald Trump announces the Muslim ban, recaptures the narrative for that day. And then he wants to be liked. He really wants to be liked. He wants to be accepted. There's a chip on his shoulder that's been there since he was a young man in Queens, crossing the river to start making or building skyscrapers in Manhattan. His father said he could never do it, and he was trying to prove him wrong. But he was never really accepted by the ruling class, if you will, of Manhattan. So he's always been trying to prove himself. And that's why with reporters, he'll be extremely friendly at first and very charming, because he wants reporters to like him. Just like and anyone who, if you meet him in person, he's a very charming person. He's very nice. He wants you to like him.
Katy Tur, I want to ask you a little bit about yourself. And again, I have to shuffle here a little bit, but your family. You were born into the news biz. Your parents, Bob and Marika Tur.
It's an understatement. I was born while my parents were covering a breaking news story.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Yeah, and for those who don't know, Bob Tur, Marika Tur, legendary in Los Angeles. You know them without knowing that you know them. They changed the face of local news, and as you write, maybe not for the better. Your dad, a gutsy teenage runaway. You write a big mouth and a bigger ambition. Your mom from a more stable family, but she fell in love with journalism post-Watergate. They teamed up. They had a small news service in L.A. chasing, you know, gang fights or fires and things.
Car accidents.
Car
in
accidents,
the middle
yeah.
of the night. They were stringers,
Yeah.
which meant that they would go out in the middle of the night and cover news stories when the local news didn't have cameramen out. And then they would sell it to the morning shows and the afternoon shows in the day. And they built up a business with that.
Bought a helicopter at one point.
Yeah.
There was a big strike in L.A. All the cameramen and the news teams were on strike, but your parents stepped
They didn't
in.
physically cross a picket line, but they essentially
flew over
were they were scabs. They didn't have the helicopter at that time. They did it because my mom was pregnant with my brother. I was 2 years old, and my dad had this ambition to be a helicopter journalist and to cover Los Angeles from the skies. LA's a big place. You need a helicopter to get around. He had this really big idea, and he walked into one helicopter company, and they laughed him out. I mean, he was 24 at the time, 24 at the time. And he had 30 grand in his pocket, and the helicopter at that point cost 250 grand. And then the second helicopter company said, okay, we'll give this to you.
And they bought it and became sensations.
Leased it.
released it, became sensations. They changed everything. I mean, suddenly everything was up in the sky. They were doing these car chases. And then, you know, Bob and Katy Tur became the people behind the famous video of Reginald Denny being pulled from his truck during the LA riots. When you hear that sound saying, oh my God, they're beating him.
They're trying to kill him.
They're trying to kill him. That's your dad. And then the white Bronco. And the person in the helicopter chasing the white Bronco, and you hear his voice, is Bob Tur. And was your mom up there?
My mom was the camera woman, so
Camerawoman.
she was hanging. I mean, at this time, she was hanging out of the helicopter with a, she gets none of the credit, and I feel so bad for her because she was literally hanging out of the helicopter with a beta cam on her shoulder, which is like a 70-pound camera, just literally hanging, nothing between her and the ground but air, and she had a canvas strap that was hooking her into harness that hooked her into the helicopter, and she did that over fires, she did that over floods, she did that over police pursuits, she did that over riots. And at one point during the LA riots, while they were covering the Reginald Denny beating, the gang members were shooting up at the helicopter. When they landed, the mechanic said that there was bullet damage in the engine blades, and there was bullet damage in the battery, the camera battery that she stowed beneath her seat. So,
your parents are amazing. I'm sorry. I mean,
crazy.
I was, you know, covering the riots, and you know, when I put that together, they're all Turs.
There's not very many Turs out there.
Right. It just, and you grew up with this. There's video of you as you write in your book at 4 years old doing your own little news reporting with your dad, making up news stories, covering fires. They used to buzz you in the playground at school. You hung out of that helicopter.
I did. There was one, I did not have a harness on either. There was one instance, and my poor father almost had a heart attack in the middle of this, where we were over the Rose Parade in Los Angeles, and my dad was doing live reports for the radio at the time, and he brought me up, and I was a very savvy kid, figured out how to open the helicopter door. It's not easy. It's pretty complicated. You have to pull down, pull out, and then pull to the side. And I did it as a 4-year-old because I wanted to get a better look at the floats below. And my dad remembers looking back and very calmly, because he was cool under pressure, saying, Katie, please sit down.
Katie barred the door.
I sat down. He reaches back, he pulled the door shut, and then he said he immediately had to land the helicopter because he thought he was going to pass out.
Yeah, well, with good reason.
Understandably.
But you, I mean, it was a wonderful life for a long time, Porsches and trips to Hawaii. I mean, your parents became very successful.
Yeah, they were.
It changed at a certain point. They were not successful. They were losing the helicopter, and it seemed to spiral out. I want to talk about that, but you, even when they were at the height, this didn't appeal to you. Journalism didn't appeal to you. It wasn't that's not the story.
No, I mean, it just seems so disruptive in our lives. I am a terrible eater. I have to try to remind myself when I'm out with my now fiance to eat like a lady, because I have a tendency to just stuff food in my face, because when I was a kid, we would be in the middle of a meal and something would come over the scanners, and we'd have to just stop what we were doing and get in the helicopter and cover it. I mean, they lived story to story. My mom used to sleep with a scanner in her ear. It was a disruptive lifestyle. There was no stability to it. And my dad would put a camera on my face all the time, and I just had no desire to be in front of it. I would run in the opposite direction.
What changed?
An awkward teenager, too.
What changed?
I mean, you can't deny your genes, I guess. I wanted to be a doctor, but I think I got a D in chemistry. I was terrible at it, really bad at math. And then I changed my major to philosophy, and I was going to go to law school. And I sat down with one of the counselors in my last year of college, and she said, you need this score to get into UCLA on the LSAT. And I just said, I just don't want to study any longer. I wasn't feeling it. And I was driving back to school one weekend with my boyfriend at the time, my college boyfriend, and there was a fire in Malibu. I went to UC Santa Barbara. Lived in Los Angeles, so you drove up PCH, and there was a cutoff because there was a fire in Malibu. And my dad, even after the business fell apart, kept making me fake press passes. And this one, he took my photo and he put it over a photo of my grandmother, who was in the business with my family, and then relaminated it. And so that was my press pass. It's a felony, by the way. I don't know if you know that. I didn't at the time, or I certainly would not have done this next thing. I pulled up to the sheriff's officer who was guarding the line, and I showed him my press pass, and I said, my crew's up ahead, I'd like to go in and see the fire. And I'm sure he knew it was fake. I mean, it was so obviously fake. But he let me through, and my boyfriend looked at me and he said, I have never seen you more confident than you were just then, lying to that officer. And I thought, you know, I'm always chasing ambulances. I'm always curious about what's behind that crime tape. I want to be in the know. I can't deny it any longer. I'm gonna go into the news business. I told my parents. It did not go well.
Because they didn't want you to do it?
They didn't want me to. At this point, you know, so when I was 14, KCBS undercut all of their staff and breached their contract. And the whole business fell apart. And my parents fell apart because of it. They had Porsches and we went on Hawaiian vacations, but because we did all that, they never put any money into a bank account, so we didn't really save. So when the business fell apart, the family kind of fell apart. And when I told my dad specifically that I was going into it, he was angry. He felt like he had been victimized. He didn't feel like the news business was a good place to be. He's the one that wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer because it was so much more stable. And we got into a giant argument, and he basically said, you're going to end up, you know, asking, do you want fries with that for a living? And I slammed the door in his face in my apartment, and we didn't talk for a week.
Well, and apparently there was some further estrangement. You can clarify, because your parents were divorced, and 10 years later, your father, Bob Tur, transitioned and became Zoe Tur.
My dad is now Zoe, yeah.
Yep, and if you see the O.J. Made in America documentary, it's now a woman.
She's great in it.
She's
She's
dad
fantastic in
is
it.
great in it. How difficult was that for you, or how?
Obviously, it's a difficult situation. Yeah. I mean, no, we didn't see it coming. It's hard. It's hard when a parent changes so drastically. But my dad is an incredibly brave person, and she's always been an incredibly brave person, a boundary defier and rule breaker. That's the way it's always been. The estrangement is difficult. It's long-standing. I mean, you could see a glimpse of it when I decided to go into the news business. It's not a complete estrangement. We talk, but it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. My family's complicated, but I am really, really proud of the decision that she made, and I think that it takes a lot of guts to do that.
Yeah. Boy, we could do a whole hour on that, could we not? But you make it clear in your book that your dad is, as you say, big mouth, outspoken. In fact, you say at one point, when you're in one of the exchanges with Donald Trump, the candidate, hey, you can deal with this because you had this dad. You had
everybody.
This family.
I have these very larger-than-life figures in my life that I've grown up with, and arguments at the dinner table were a normal thing. Everybody had very strong opinions, and the way that Donald Trump sometimes it wasn't unfamiliar. Let's put it that way, and it was a good primer for standing up to people later in life. But that's my whole family. We're all kind of like that. My mom, my brother, my dad, my uncles, my aunts. We all have big loud mouths, and we all like to to yell at each other over a Thanksgiving dinner table.
Yeah. Would love to be a fly on that wall.
Tony, my fiance, is here. He's going to have to deal with that for the next foreseeable future. I'm sorry, wherever you are.
Back to Donald Trump. Have you had any interaction with him? Did he respond to the book?
He subtweeted me. It was very exciting. He said something along the lines of, "It's fascinating to see people who have zero access to me write major articles and publish major books." I had just done an article for the New York Times, and and then he said zero access, which is kind of his code word for me. He always likes to say that I have zero access.
But you had sit-down.
I had sit-down. I had a lot of access. But here's the thing about Donald Trump: you don't need, and any politician, you don't need access. Access is not how you do journalism. You dig and you fact check and you contextualize and you try to shed light on the person, and you don't need access to do that. Access journalism is barely journalism, and he is so public as it is. The idea of needing access to cover him is a bit laughable, or any public figure for that matter.
But where are we now? And where do you think Trump supporters are now? Are you still in contact with the many you met? And as you said, acts of kindness from many. Dr. McCormick was telling us that there are many Trump supporters who come here to this institute because they feel that, I hope I'm quoting you correctly, they feel that while they support their guy, they elected someone to be a disruptor. They never thought he understood government. That wasn't why they elected him. And now they are coming here to learn more about government so they can help him. What are you hearing? We know that the polls show
there's some softening.
There's some softening.
Well, it depends on who you ask. There are some that volunteered for Trump that are still very enthusiastic about him. Some folks up in New Hampshire that I talk to regularly. There is a gentleman down in South Carolina who would show up at every Trump rally that he would hold, enthusiastically there, loved Donald Trump, thought he was wonderful, thought he was a disruptor, thought that he would bring change, is horrified and appalled at the president that he's become. Part of what he doesn't like about it is the attacks on the press. He thinks that is just way overboard and not helpful for anything. But there is an idea that people elected Donald Trump because they thought he would be throwing a bomb into the system. He might not know everything about policy. He might not know the ins and outs of healthcare or the ins and outs of Veterans Affairs, but he will hire the right people to do the jobs. And I would ask people why they believe that about him. And a lot of the time the answer I would get, and don't laugh when I say this, is I saw him do it on The Apprentice. I said not to laugh.
I told you not to laugh.
But it's part of, Donald Trump has created a mythology around himself. And he's always done that since he got onto the real estate scene, the tabloid scene in New York in the 1970s, 1980s. He has been selling Donald Trump. He's not a real estate mogul. He's a branding mogul. He doesn't build buildings generally. He puts his name on buildings.
He sells his name.
He sells himself. He sells the image of success. He sells the image of a deal maker. He goes out and he'll say over and over again, I alone can fix this. I can make deals nobody else can. This is a terrible deal. I will make it better. Deal, 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 deal. That word is, I think, the most loved word in his vocabulary. And he is successful at it. But he's always been successful at it. It wasn't just Donald Trump's supporters. It was the reporters in New York in the 90s, in the 80s. Jimmy Breslin wrote about this early on for Newsday in New York. And this was around the time that Donald Trump was on the verge of financial collapse. When he was going through his bankruptcies, he was, to use a cliche, hanging on by a thread. And people were starting to say, oh, Donald Trump's going to fail. And Breslin came out with an article and said, how could you say that? Donald Trump will create a razzle-dazzle. He'll call all the reporters in New York and say, Donald Trump's too big to fail. Donald Trump is going to come back bigger than ever. And he will convince them. And they'll write stories about it. And then
he'll call them in using a name that isn't his.
Well, that too. And then the real estate magnates, the investors in New York City will say, no, Donald Trump can't fail. And they'll loan him money because he's created this mythology around himself. And he's doing that successfully for a certain segment of voters still to this day. So when things don't go right, sorry to keep going, when things don't go right, it's not Donald Trump that made them go wrong, it's Congress's fault.
Well, he's kicking everything down to Congress. But there are still people who hold out, that many people who hold out, that his is the voice needed right now. Stand up to the president of North Korea, stand up to the world that hasn't, speaking, their opinions now, that hasn't respected the United States. Stand up to trade deals that most economists say they've actually benefited people like American farmers, but they don't see it that way. Is there a chance? I mean, is there a chance this could turn out to be a great presidency?
I think it depends on who you ask. Honestly, I think there's just wildly differing opinions of Donald Trump. If you are a supporter of his, you will defend it. You will defend it, defend it, defend it, defend it. If you're not, you will take it apart. We'll see what people say in 4 years. Does he get anything done? Does this Republican-controlled Congress pass legislation, any legislation, really, major legislation, before the midterms? That is still an open question. There is a lot on their plate. If they can't agree on health care, which they've been running on repealing now for 7-8 years, do you expect them to agree on tax reform? That's a much more complicated subject. And he's going after Bob Corker. He's going after Lisa Murkowski. He's going after Susan Collins. He's going after John McCain. He will need their voices and their votes to get any of these things done. That is unless he suddenly goes to Democrats and convinces Democrats to get on board, and that is still a big if as well.
A couple more questions from people who are here. Is Magdalena here? I hope. Well, anyway, Magdalena had a great question. She said, do you have any advice for a young woman of color who feels she has so much to say and contribute to the public discourse but has no idea how to get started, especially in today's political and journalistic climate? What do you say? Because I know we do have a lot of, aren't there some students up here? Where are the students? They're being shy. But, oh my God, they could be back there. It makes me want to, over there? They're over there. They're somewhere. They're over there.
Oh, they're right there.
Oh, there you are. Thank you. What do you say to journalism students who might have watched what you went through?
Well, the young women of color, get loud, be out there, participate in your local politics. Run for office if you want to run for office. There are local positions that you can run for. Participate in your town halls.
I have to say, it's a really tough climate. We had Gretchen Carlson on our program today. She's, of course, the Fox News anchor who sued and successfully sued, saying she was fired because she didn't respond to Roger Ailes' sexual harassment, overtures. You look at her Twitter feed and what she gets. I don't know, she gets out of bed in the morning.
You know what? You ignore it. Yeah, it's a tough climate. So what? Get up and fight. Fight for what you believe in. It's not going to get better if you just say it's a tough climate, I can't get out there. That's not how it gets better.
It comes from a woman who hung out of a helicopter when she was 4. And so I think it's...
No, but what I say to journalism students is it's a tough business. There's no doubt about that. Especially the TV world, it can be hard to break in. But there are so many more forms of journalism now, and there's so much more opportunity out there. There are digital outlets that have a whole host of jobs that didn't exist 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. You don't just have to go to your local newspaper or to your local television station. You can get on a blog like 538.com. You can get on a blog like Vox.com. There's Politico. There's a number of smaller versions of those. There's Patch. I know you guys have Patch. Patch still exists everywhere, right? I was hoping. And you can make your way in through that and work up the ladder and just refuse to take no for an answer when it comes to finding a bigger job.
And what should journalism students or any of us learn from this campaign? I mean, you were one of the first to say, no, President Trump, I'm covering him. I'm the only one covering him. besides some, smaller outlets, he could win. I have to say, I said it in Iowa, having seen what was happening on the ground
Don't
there.
discount him. I mean, we declared his candidacy dead dozens and dozens and dozens of times. We've declared his presidency a failure a number of times as well. And we've said, how could anybody vote for him again? If he doesn't do this, his voters won't vote for him. I'll give you this as a cautionary tale. What is the one thing that Donald Trump needs to do to keep his base, guys? What's the one thing? So I'm talking to a guy in Ohio.
They said go to war.
I said build a wall.
Oh, I thought you said go to war. Oh, I'm glad I clarified. It could be either, but go ahead. Build a wall.
Build a wall. We're going to take that one. And I was talking to a guy in Ohio, and I asked him late in the campaign, why do you like Donald Trump? And the man answered, because he is going to build a wall. And I said, what if he doesn't build a wall? It's okay, I trust his judgment. Straight face, but that's emblematic of Donald Trump's support. There's a trust there that goes beyond his policies. They voted for the man, not the positions. So don't assume because he did not do something that those voters won't go out and vote for him again. Also, he's defied political gravity so many times. Who's to say that that's going to stop now?
David asked, has your book been optioned for a movie, and if so, who would you like to play you?
No, and no. No.
Really?
It has not been optioned for a movie, no.
Oh, see, because I still,
What about a play? How do we feel about a play?
A play, but then we don't
A musical.
We don't get the helicopter. Yeah. I'm just interested in the helicopter part, and that would be better in a movie.
That if you're gonna make a movie, I say make a movie about my parents, because they are fascinating people. Yeah. And if you buy the book, and I hope you guys buy the book, but it's chapter 6. It's about my family. It's the best chapter in the book. My parents are incredible, amazing people, and the way we grew up, my brother and I, is just wild. It's totally wild.
Well, and it sounds like it set you on the path that you were able to then.
My mom was pregnant I was hours from giving birth to me on a breaking news story, a shooting in Los Angeles. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Well, no wonder you held up under the incredible pressure of the last year. I do encourage you to buy the book, and there will be an opportunity afterwards to talk to Katy and have it signed. But Katy Tur, hashtag I'm with Tur. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Katy and Robin. It is truly an unbelievable story. We would encourage you now to buy the book if you would like to at the bookstore, and Katy's going to do a signing. We'd also encourage you to think about becoming a member of the Institute so that you can hear more about these kinds of exciting programs. Thank you both. It was terrific.
Let's pass some legislation while we're here.